The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Marion Walsh. I'm the presenter for updates on the Common Core learning standards for students in New York State. I'm an attorney with Littman Krooks representing students with disabilities, and I'm an educational advocate. So today, as noted, we're going to be talking about updates on the Common Core. Our goals and essential questions for this presentation are to understand the aims of the Common Core, understand the timelines, to understand the curriculum shifts, and to know how to get support for your struggling child or students with disabilities. As you all know, the Common Core represents an unprecedented challenge for students in New York State as well as students around the country. And it's also a challenge for parents and for educators. It's important to know the background. Why the Common Core? Some of you may know this already, but to review, the Common Core is an effort by states and school administrators to ensure that state standards are aligned with the expectations in schools and skills required for post-secondary education and work. These are the first learning standards to be back-mapped from the skills that students need in college and career and going backwards to kindergarten. And just to dispel any misconceptions, in New York, the Board of Regents is very committed to the Common Core, and it is here to stay for the near future. This is also a national initiative, and approximately between 44 to 46 states have adopted the Common Core. And just to give you some of the background, the Common Core conceptually is really part of the No Child Left Behind Act assessments from 2001, which did require states to set challenging academic achievement standards and assessments from grade 3 and up. And the goal at that point was to reach proficiency by 2014. Of course, unfortunately, that has not occurred. It's a very unrealistic expectation, and the NCLB has not been, there is a lot more flexibility for the states with implementing NCLB. So essentially, the Common Core standards make NCLB assessments more rigorous and uniform between the states. Now, just to give you another background, some more background in New York, there's also the PARC assessments, Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, and these are really the computer-based assessments which will be part of the Common Core. So these aren't going to be new assessments. But there will be a computer implementation of the Common Core assessment. So if you hear the acronym PARC, that's what that means as well. The development of the Common Core originated back from around 2008, 2009, when national and international research showed that students from the United States were really lagging behind other countries, particularly in math and science. The final version of the Common Core was released in June 2010, and New York adopted the standards in 2010. Now, as many of you know, there was no teacher training before the Common Core went into effect, no student preparation. The assessments were just put into place 2013 without letting students have really any preparation or background for this. So consequently, you can look at the standards on New York State proficiency on the ELA and math assessments. In 2009, we had a high proficiency rate going down. When the Common Core assessments were implemented in 2013, really only 31% of students in New York State achieved proficiency. That's a level 3 on the ELA and math assessments. I know the assessments, the results will be out within the next few weeks for 2014. And we'll see if that has gone up at all with 1 year of some preparation. So the theories on how the Common Core will help, these more rigorous standards standards are supposed to prepare students for college-level work. Students will learn to think in depth and be prepared for the competitive workplace. There is very little guidance on the career readiness aspect of the Common Core. More of this is geared toward college preparation, which does make it very challenging for students with learning difficulties and disabilities. And just a good article to read to understand the genesis and the need for the Common Core. There was an article in the New York Times Magazine this past Sunday on why, the title was, "Why Do Americans Stink at Math?" It's a cover article for the New York Times Magazine, and it went through the reasons for the Common Core, the laudable theories, in particular geared toward math. And it also noted that the main problem with the Common Core was that there really has not been enough teacher training, unfortunately. Teachers are really left in the lurch and having to implement these difficult standards. But there is a very good theory here that on why the opportunity to change the way math is taught is unprecedented. That carefully taught, these assessments can make math more concrete so that students don't just memorize formulas or memorize timetables, but really are supposed to understand this. But in practice, you have to remember, teachers have been teaching a certain way for many years, and without a lot more professional development and time and resources devoted, the teachers are not going to be able to prepare the students, and the students are going to be confused, and then this, of course, makes parents very frustrated. So it's really a perfect storm, which has laudable initiatives of very high standards and a completely new way of learning, not enough resources or professional development, not enough time. So the question is now, where do we go from here, and what are the effects on our students? Of course, there's a lot of research based on the way the Common Core was implemented that right now we are really failing our students in preparing them. Only 3.2% of ELL students passed the test in 2013, and only 5% of students with disabilities. So commentator Diane Ravitch has noted that many of these students may just give up instead of trying, so we need to make sure that our children have as much support as possible, and also we need to advocate for teachers to have more support in training and more professional development. Now, just how the Common Core is changing learning, it's important to understand briefly these shifts in the classroom as parents. There's a lot of information on Engage New York and how to do this. So just to understand conceptually how the shifts are working, we will go over that in the later part of the presentation. But first, I want to go over the implementation timeline. I'm not going to go through each year, but it's important to know there is, from the state's perspective, some sort of phase-in for the regions at least, so that ultimately students do not have to reach Common Core proficiency to graduate unless they're part of the class of 2022. So it's important to note that it's not, you don't have to reach Common Core proficiency at this time. But as we stated, the Common Core was first implemented in 2012-13. The first assessments were last year, spring 2013. And high schools may have previously offered courses aligned with the Common Core, but 2013-14 was the first year they were required to do so. Of course, again, there was limited training available, but the first Common Core Regents exams in ELA and math were spring 2014. So, just to understand, students who entered high school prior to September 13 are not required to receive instruction under the Common Core or to meet those standards in order to graduate. But in ELA, the Common Core exam is already available, even though the first students are required to be instructed, are not scheduled to sit for it until June 2016. Now, there's a lot of flexibility and confusion here, and these standards may even change in the future, so it's not going to be set in stone. It's important in preparing for the exam to understand what your child is learning, particularly at the Regents level, and to know what exam he or she is going to take. Now, for students with disabilities, of course, students with disabilities can stay in school until 21, but it's better to pass these exams early, if possible, to avoid a Common Core assessments. So all students, including students with disabilities who entered high school by September 2012, can fulfill their diploma requirements with the old or former Regents exams rather than the more rigorous Common Core exams. There's generally a choice. However, although such students are permitted to work toward their diploma requirements through age 21, the former Regents exam will cease to be available before then. So it's better if you can to get those Regents in sooner rather than later. And I just want to note as we go through the implementation, there will be an opportunity for questions at the end of the presentation, and I will devote 15 minutes at the end just to answer any questions that I can. As I noted, many of these are in flux, and we're all kind of working this out together, including the states and school districts. So again, implementation timeline. Students who entered high school in September 2012 have only one extra year to pass the former exams compared to their typically developing peers before they're phased out. They may continue to attempt the available Common Core line exams after that date, as that will be their only path to a diploma. So for students with disabilities, this is a further erosion of the safety net, which makes things, of course, more challenging. So this is the chart, implementation timeline, Regents exams from the state. So the former exam, algebra, scheduled administration will be June 2013. The final administration will be June 2015. Geometry, scheduled examination June 2014. The final will be January 16. These are the former Regents exams. English, scheduled will be June 2015. The final will be June 2016. So these are gradually being phased out. And this is to understand the safety net erosion for students with disabilities who do receive more protection. If the student enters high school, September 2010 and before, they need a 55 or better on the former Regents in English and Math or a passing grade on the less rigorous RCT. Regents exams and RCTs may be attempted as many times as desired through age 21. And that is to clarify the year, in New York, it's the end of the school year the student turns 21. So if the student turns 21 in April, have until June 30th, just to clarify. September 11 to 12, 55 or better on the former Regents exam in English and Math, and students have only one extra year. More rigorous Common Core exams may be attempted as many times as desired through age 21. And September 2013 and later, students need a 55 or better on the Common Core Regents exams, and they may be attempted as many times through age 21. And by 2022, which we'll discuss later, students will have to achieve proficiency on those Common Core exams. And as I said, there may be more flexibility given by New York State as time goes on. And I'm not even going into right now the CDOS flexibility, which is the commencement credential for students with disabilities, or the skills and achievement credential. So just to back up now conceptually on the Common Core shifts, just to understand what this means, which is, as I noted, very theoretical, but it's important to understand what the aims are, so that the first shift this is for grades, all grades, K to 12, and the assessments from 3 to 12. The first shift for the English language ELA assessment is that they really want students to have both fiction and nonfiction and literary text. So there's informational, nonfiction, and fiction. So more of an emphasis on nonfiction in the past. This shift 2 is supposed to be knowledge in the disciplines, more knowledge through text and reading rather than through teacher activities. And shift 3 is really more complex information, reading grade level appropriate text that is more complex and rigorous. The next shift is text-based answers, so that students are supposed to engage in conversation about the text. These are very theoretical statements, but there is, when you look at the assessments and the work that's supposed to be given and the instruction, there is a shift just to more reading, more in-depth, more rigor generally. And then the shift 5 is writing from sources, Writing emphasizes use of primary sources to inform or make an argument. So it's more in-depth, supposed to be more in-depth learning. Shift 6, academic vocabulary, is supposed to be really in-depth vocabulary, more rigorous vocabulary that students need to access grade level text. Now, particularly for students with disabilities, these shifts are very challenging. Students with reading disabilities, learning disabilities, students with autism, students with almost all of the disability categories. So you're going to see that this is not as simple. It's not simple to implement these curriculum shifts, particularly for teachers. So I've shown this example before in past presentations, so I'm sorry if you've seen it before, but this is an example. I'm going to show you what the former exam looked like, and then I'm going to show you what the Common Core looks like. So you can see this is a relatively simple grade 6 question. In both the Demosthenes biography and Icarus and Daedalus myth, the main characters are given advice from other people. Do you respond to advice from other people more like Demosthenes or more like Icarus? Write an essay in which you explain who you're more like when it comes to taking advice and why. Use details. And in your response, be sure to do the following. So you tell whether you're more like Demosthenes or Icarus, and it's relatively straightforward. It's centered on the person. You can write from your own experience. There is an essay before this. And then you look at the Common Core assessments, that in both these biographies, the main characters exhibit determination in pursuit of their goals. Did determination help both main characters reach their goals, or did it lead them to tragedy? Write an argument for whether you believe determination helped or hurt the two main characters. And your response, be sure you do the following. Describe how determination affected the outcome. Describe how determination affected the outcome in Icarus and Daedalus. And then explain the similarities or differences that exist and use details. So you can see it's centered away from the person, away from personal experience, rather toward objectively how the student can interpret the text and really understand this rather in-depth analysis of whether determination helped both main characters reach their goals. So it's not something you can really subjectively put in your own experience. So it's quite complicated for students, particularly in the 6th grade level. Now the math shifts, it's important to understand this also, and I think, again, this New York Times article, if you can get it online, I think it helps explain the theoretical basis for why these shifts are occurring. The first shift is supposed to be focused. Teachers narrow and deepen the scope of how time and energy is spent in math to focus deeply on the concepts. So rather than a teacher just teaching the formulas, say to teach the method on how to teach do long division, you would be spending time on really to understand conceptually and really be able to picture these skills. And again, the reason for these shifts are because students have not be able to compete internationally on a lot of test scores, and as a nation we don't have a lot of math proficiency. So the next shift is coherence. Students are supposed to connect the learning within and across grade levels so students can build foundations in previous years, which should be happening now, but it's supposed to be more in depth with these conceptual understandings. The next shift is fluency. Students are expected to have speed and accuracy with simple calculations. It's a lot of, so there does have to be a lot of drilling just with repetition core functions such as multiplication, but at the same time there's supposed to be this deep understanding of the concepts. Again, this next shift, which we talked about, is this deep understanding. Students are supposed to deeply understand and can operate within a math context before moving on. These are complete shifts in the way math is taught. Next shift is application. Students are expected to use math and choose the appropriate concept for application even when not prompted. The next shift, dual intensity. So students are supposed to be both practicing and understanding, not just practicing. I think one of the criticisms from the past in math is that students were mainly practicing and not deeply understanding. And there is some research, which was mentioned in the New York Times article, that even students without formal education in other countries had a basic understanding on how to give change, how to understand percentages. But when you just do it based on formulas and the way to practice, sometimes you lose that basic intuitive understanding that even the children have. But again, this is a complete shift in teaching, and teachers have not been given time, have not been given training on how to do this. So the students who are going to succeed at the Common Core are probably those entering kindergarten now, when we have time for professional development. But the ones who are in the middle right now, I know I have a middle school student who's right in the middle of all this, and it's not going to be easy just to shift to this new way of learning. It's certainly not easy for the teachers either. So I'm just going to, I've given this to in other presentations as well, but just to give you an example of a former 5th grade assessment, which is students making an apple crumb pie. And you have to figure out how much sugar Pierre must use to make the pie crumb and filling. So it's a very simple question. You add 1/3 a cup of sugar, 1/3 cup of sugar here, and you get 2/3 a cup. Simple. You know, you have a formula, you know how to add fractions, and you're finished. Now this one is what a Common Core 5th grade assessment is. This is 5th grade. So your student's eating pizza, and you have one student's eating 1/3, and you have to calculate, show all your thinking, and basically Lewis says they each ate the same amount of pizza, when Tito says the opposite. So you have to show all your calculations. I'm not going to go through and tell you how to get there, but you can see when you look at the answer, the level of complexity required for a student to be able to do this math. And it's, yes, there's supposed to be a deep understanding, but it's also, there's a lot that goes in here. It's not just, of course, adding fractions. It's being able to diagram, being able to write all your work out, and being able to really take this one step at a time, this very complex question. And again, this is 5th grade. So you put on top of this a student with a learning disability, a student who's having trouble with attention, a student's having trouble with emotional difficulties, and you put that on top of it, and you note the extreme difficulties that students are experiencing. So just to explain how, so shifting to the scoring, how it now works in New York. In the former assessments, level 3 and level 4 were proficient, and the state has modified this slightly to say, of course, a student who achieves a level 4 in the Common Core, the student excels in Common Core for the grade level. A level 3, the student is proficient in the Common Core for the grade level and is really on track for college and career readiness. New York State level 2, the student is below proficient in grade level, but they're now on track to graduate for high school because they're not required until 2022 to actually meet the level, what would be the level 3 standard on that trajectory. And then the New York level 1, the student is well below proficient. So there's a little bit of a shift. A lot more students are receiving level 2s than in the past. And so they're still saying they're still on track to graduate. They're just not proficient right now in the Common Core, which is, of course, not a failure on a part of the student or on the part of the teachers, because there just hasn't been time or training yet. Now, just to explain, again, just to explain a little more the scoring and the Common Core phase-in. Again, the high school class of 2022 is the first group required to meet the Common Core standards for graduation. So these are the students who are 5th graders as of September 2014. The 3rd graders for the first Common Core test in 2012 to 2013. And these students will enter high school in September 2018. And they'll take the Common Core Algebra Regents June 2019. And then the ELA Regents 2021. Now older students will be required to take Common Core Learning Standards exams, but the 65 score necessary to pass the Regents level will be set lower than the proficiency level. So there is going to be time and flexibility, and again, these standards may change. They're not set in stone right now, and if it looks like we're not getting, students are not improving with the increased training and professional development, then I think the standards may even change more. But this is the plan right now from New York State. Now, just to understand the scoring and Common Core phase-in, so since 2010, New York State has posted data for the 2 levels of achievement on the former Regents exam. So 65 is sufficient for graduation. 75 in English and 80 for math is considered college and career ready. So that would meet the Common Core standards. And again, New York State will maintain 2 cut scores on the Common Core exams so that the same percentage of students were expected to pass the Common Core exams in 2014 as passed the former exams in 2013. It's going to take some time to digest this. I'm just going through the guidance from the state. And then the passing score will continue to be lower than the college and career ready score. So there is this time for the phase-in. Now, as far as setting the cut scores on, for example, the difference for the elementary levels between the 2s and the 3s, this was done by panelists contracted by New York State, and they did set the cut scores in 2013 and spent a lot of time reviewing the data, reviewing the proficiency levels. And these panelists recommended, and they plan, New York State Education Department plans to hold the constant year to year to see how performance has changed. So there's not going to be a shift in the cut score. It's a difference between a 2 and a 3. So they're not moving the bar between a 2 and a 3 or between a 1 and a 2, and this way we can see whether students are actually learning. So this makes it even more challenging. And you can read, there's an article in the Journal News, July 27, 2014, The Space Between Falling Behind and Being on Track. And you can review that online to explain how the panelists reach this level, or reach the decision, rather. Now, academic intervention services. It's important to understand what's available and what's not available. And right now, under New York State law, students who, quote unquote, fail to achieve proficiency on ELA and math exams must receive AIS. However, New York State has given a safe harbor to the school districts and given flexibility. So until 2012, when the Common Core came into place, students who received 1s and 2s were failing to meet then current standards were entitled to receive AIS, no question. But now, in 2013 and going forward, until new guidance comes out, of course, many more students received 1 and 2s, and New York State basically had said that students who received 1s in 2013 were entitled to AIS, but students who received 2s were entitled only if they received a 2 in 2012. But this is even further eroded to further flexibility, to really letting districts decide. So there's really a limited mandate. Clearly, if a student receives a 1, they should be getting AIS. A 2 is going to be more of a question, but it's very important to advocate for your own child to get the EIS services. And some districts are just doing it for every student because it's too complicated to decide who's proficient, who's not proficient. So just again, there's a little more guidance on AIS. New York State clarified that for students in grade 5 and above who do not need to achieve proficiency in CLS to graduate, a score of 2 is still on track. But 5 to 8 would, for students in 5 to 8, a score of 2 on the New York State exams corresponds to an expected score of 65 later on. So again, it's not clear whether such students will be entitled to AIS. So the most important thing to note here is to really advocate for your child to receive AIS if it's needed. And you may have to advocate strongly with the school districts because there's a lot of mandates the schools are dealing with, and there is a safe harbor that the state has given the school districts for AIS. All right, now another issue that's been in the news lately a lot is whether you should opt out or allow your child to opt out of Common Core assessments. A few prominent politicians in Westchester County have even advocated taking a stand and not allowing their child to take the Common Core assessments. But it is important to really consider this decision before you do this. On the one hand, of course, the decision may send a statement and empower your child, but on the other hand, it's important to note this Common Core is the general curriculum, and in order to advance from grade to a grade and achieve a high school diploma, your child will have to progress in this curriculum. So even if there are significant difficulties your child is having and you don't agree with the assessments, I recommend careful thought before you opt out. So you should really consider the following. Talking to your child's teacher and the school principal about the reasons you don't want your child to take the assessments, and asked about more support, and really understand the consequences for your child and the school district. There is technically no legal right to opt out of the Common Core assessments. However, most school districts will give the flexibility and allow students to opt out just to avoid having a battle. And there are repercussions for the school district for not enough students taking the exam. There can be a loss of funding. Districts have to have a 95% participation rate in order to make adequate yearly progress, and there are no child left behind. So it's also important to make sure that opting out will not make your child more anxious by feeling singled out. But the main point to note is that your child is going to have to progress in these standards. The Common Core is right now here to stay. It's unlikely that even the substantial numbers of people opting out are going to convince the regions to change it, and it's a national movement as well. So it's important to, I think, validate these assessments for your child to some degree and advocate more support rather than just stepping out of them. You have to remember students are going to be taking many standardized assessments in their careers. Of course, there's SATs and ACTs for college. There's professional requirements for say medical school or law school, and then there's assessments also for students with disabilities entering the workplace. And so unfortunately, standardized assessments are part of our students' educational experience, and opting out is not always the best option, but it's something to consider. You can check your school district's policy on opting out and just make sure you follow that. Now, specifically, the Common Core for students with disabilities. There is information available from New York State, but again, these New York State tests in grades 3 to 8 and 8L math were the first aligned with Common Core standards. Most schools had not implemented the Common Core curriculum. Only 5% of students with disabilities pass the test or achieve proficiency. So, and the students with disabilities in 2013 to 14 continually struggle with the rigorous and sometimes arcane new standards. Teachers and parents are also struggling to support students with disabilities in the new curriculum. And there is some guidance out there, but it tends to be very general and not specific enough. So this is some of the guidance that's available. The State Education Department, just in June 2013, did issue specific information for stakeholders, that's parents, teachers, and CSE members, regarding the Common Core and students with disabilities. So here is the resource you could look at later just on what the Common Core supports are. And I'm going to go through some of it. Again, New York State does affirm that all students with disabilities must be taught in accordance with Common Core learning standards. And these are all students. There's no exceptions. So you really, but the key here is differentiation of instruction, which we'll talk about later. You have to consider, the school has to consider what students are expected to achieve within one school year and consider how the strengths and challenges of a student with disability are expected to impact achievement. Again, the Individual with Disabilities Education Act does require progress and participation in the general curriculum. The Common Core is the general curriculum, so you have to make sure your own child or your students receive supports and related services designed to meet their unique needs and to enable their access to the general education curriculum, which is the Common Core. It just means the standards are higher now. There has to be more support in place and more training. And then, of course, to make things more complicated, just to back up a minute, the U.S. Department of Education has proposed regulations back in 2013 to transition away from the so-called 2% rule, so that would even get rid of the alternate assessments. There would still be exceptions for students graduating with Regents diploma or a state diploma based on the assessments, but there's a proposal that states could count as, but to eliminate this 2% rule that students could take alternate assessments. And it would maintain an existing exception for the most severely cognitively disabled students who need not take the challenging exams. Now, New York State has applied for a waiver to the 2% rule, and New York State had proposed on allowing students to be assessed at their appropriate instructional levels, provided that the state assessment administered to the student is not more than 2 grade levels below the student's chronological grade level, and the student is assessed at a higher grade level for each subsequent year. There has not been a decision on that I have been able to find, but there is, and it has been relatively controversial, because the goal, of course, is that every student with disability should be able to work on the Common Core standards at grade level. You don't want to have a 2-tier system, but on the other hand, it is tremendously challenging. So you have to keep an eye on that waiver and what New York State decides to do. And just to back up with the United States Department of Education proposal, the general assessments in combination with supports and instruction for students with disabilities can promote high expectations for all students by encouraging teaching and learning. That is the goal here. Not always possible, but that is the goal. Okay. Now, just to go quickly through some of these slides, it's important at your next, if you have a student with disability who has an IEP, or child with a disability, or 504, it's important at the next meeting to make sure that you talk about differentiated instruction and make sure your child is getting enough support. And it's going to be very key for teachers to understand that lesson planning for each class must specifically address the needs of students with disabilities. The pace is going to have to be slower, there's going to have to be more in-depth learning, and many more strategies to really meet these standards. So the responsibilities of the CSE staff, including an IEP with annual goals based on the student's strengths, supports and services provided within the least restrictive environment, and teachers must be knowledgeable about the Common Core, that the curriculum, that's the Common Core, and deliver high-quality, evidence-based, specifically designed instruction and support. This is the guidance from New York State, and New York State has promised more funds for professional development, but it also requires a lot of time. So again, these are the theoretical, this is the guidance from New York State, but as far as how it works out in practice is a whole other issue. IEPs must be aligned to the standards of the Common Core, and New York State does offer some guidance for CSEs in the context of the Common Core curriculum. You can look at this guidance later as well. It's on the New York State Education Department website. So CSEs, as they always do, have to consider the student's grade level curriculum, review the content and method. You have to identify the student's strengths and challenges, identify areas that have the greatest impact on the student's progress on the Common Core standards. If there's visual processing difficulties, may affect graphing skills, attentional issues will have a large impact, reading issues will have a large impact. So it's important to understand the student's unique needs. And then you have to really look at the standards to identify goals the students can be expected to achieve in 1 year. Remember, the goals on the IEP will drive the services. If your child has a Section 504, just make sure there are enough accommodations and support. And you need to identify special education services, including adaptations, needed by the students to reach those standards. So it's not too different from the CSE process in general, of course, except that you have to keep these Common Core standards in mind. So parents, the questions for the CSE review the content and method by which the student is expected to demonstrate knowledge and skills on the Common Core. And be familiar with the Common Core. Look at what your child is learning so you can really show how they may not be meeting standards. And you're supposed to ask, what is my child expected to know and do to meet next year's grade level standards in the Common Core? Again, questions for the CSE, make sure you identify your child's strengths and challenges, identify areas of the greatest impact. What can my child do? What are his struggles? What gets in the way of learning this Common Core standard? Okay. And you have to ask, how's your child doing compared to other students? So CSEs have to identify special education services, adaptations, accommodations, or modifications needed by the student to reach these standards. So as parents, you really need to ask, what accommodations and modifications will my child need? And what is he being taught in subject areas? How will he be taught? What methodology are you using to really make it work? What are the textbooks, instructional materials? What is the physical classroom environment? There should be smaller groups. There should be more hands-on learning. How his or her learning will be assessed through testing accommodations. And you have to also ask who will be implementing it, which teachers will focus on which goals. And the big questions for the CSE is your child, student, on track to achieve grade level proficiency within a year? Can the student make progress toward these standards? Unfortunately, the guidance does not have a lot of advice if the answer is no, which is going to be true for a lot of students. And the main point is to keep asking for more support. Remember, there's accommodations and modifications, and accommodations which are typically in 504 plans and can be in IEPs as well. There could be, these really level the playing field. This could include copy of class notes or other accommodations. And modifications do change the expectations, such as shorter writing assignments, fewer words. But you have to remember that modifications could affect diploma eligibility, particularly if the student can't meet the standards. It's important to understand some of the terms, such as differentiated instruction, which is extremely important in reaching Common Core proficiency for students with disabilities. So you have to use a variety of learning styles, interests, and abilities. There has to be very explicit instruction on setting the purpose for learning, teaching students how to do it, showing students how to do it, giving students opportunities. Other important terms include specifically designed instruction, scaffolding, and then universal design for learning. Make sure you bring this up at your CSE meeting to ask how your school district, how your teachers are really presenting information in a unique way for students. This is a mandate of the IDA and schools don't always use it. So really teachers are going to have to change the methodology for instruction and really use more specialized instructional support and be prepared and qualified to deliver high-level evidence-based instruction. And again, this is going to take time and professional development. There really has to be more support for teachers. And the Common Core does have curriculum modules released by the New York State Education Department in 2013, but they don't include alternative materials for students with disabilities. There are sample materials such as lesson plans and grids, but they're complex and they will require, again, professional development. Again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of universal design for learning and really understanding the unique needs of your child and how your school and your teachers are presenting information in multiple ways and allowing for diverse avenues of interaction. Okay, so that's more in universal design. And just to quickly go through the legal impact of the Common Core for students with disabilities. Public schools do have an obligation to provide a FAPE, free appropriate public education for students, and this meaningful educational benefit does mean passing grades and advancement from grade to grade. And the Common Core could change the FAPE. Passing grades will have to be based on the Common Core. So there's an obligation of every school district to comply with the procedures in the IDA and make sure the IEP is substantively appropriate, but not to maximize potential. But the Common Core is going to change, again, the standards for FAPE only because it's going to be harder to reach proficiency. So we may see higher classifications rates. Disability there may be more of an impact on educational performance because of the Common Core. So of course the standards will impact almost all students with disabilities in very different ways. So just to sum up here before I go to questions, it's important for parents to be partners with teachers and really take the time to understand how your child's teacher is teaching, and make sure you understand so that when you help your child, you're in line and do work on the competencies at home. And then at the next CSE meeting, make sure you go over the present levels of academic performance, the goals, special education services, the extent to which your child will participate with non-disabled peers, appropriate accommodations, and of course the date for beginning of services and the location, frequency, and duration of services, including possible ESY or summer services. And look for more, again, look for more alignment on the goals because the goals are going to drive the services and the support of the IEP. So I went through a lot of that very quickly, and there's a lot of information, but I'm going to take the time now for any questions people have, and I encourage you all to look at some of the resources on Engage New York and the Common Core Initiative. There's a lot of information on the website, and keep an eye on it because the standards do change. Okay, so I'm going to take some questions now. Okay, so I have a question here. What about instances where the school district does not want your child to take the Common Core assessments because of concerns that it is too difficult for him or her, and they will not do well because of language issues, and the tests are so much more language-based? Now, in theory, this should not be happening because certainly under the guidance from New York State and the guidance from the Department of Education, every child should at least aim for the Common Core standards. So a school district should not be telling a child not to participate. So I would look at the guidance on New York State, look at the mandates and the initiatives of the Common Core, and I would argue against that, particularly if you feel like your child needs to meet the standards. Again, the whole goal of these standards is to attempt to reach them and to get a lot more support to get there for students with disabilities, especially language-based. But a school district in no way should be telling a child to not take the assessments. Okay, the second question is, I disagree with your comments on parents who refuse to standardize tests for your children. And there is a link this parent had given, which I cannot access now, but it basically notes that the school may not lose funding if a child opts out. That's true. New York State and the United States Department of Education have lessened some of the penalties for students not taking the Common Core, so it may not be that immediately the school district loses funding. But there could be other repercussions, and the main reason I had given was just to consider opting out, because I do think, again, these children are going to have to work toward these assessments to graduate, so I think you may be doing your child a disservice to opt out of the assessments. But that is an individual decision, and one I noted to carefully consider with your child's teacher and the school district. Now, another question, or comment rather, is parents and educators were left out of the discussion and planning for the Common Core learning standards. For students with disabilities, they were absolutely an afterthought. There is no flexibility with the Common Core learning standards. It should not trump the IEP, which high-stakes Common Core learning standards have shifted the classroom. That is a very legitimate criticism and consideration. And you're right, New York State and indeed the whole country kind of threw together the Common Core learning standards to improve rigor, and it was really based mainly, you're absolutely right, on the college level, and the career readiness was, a lot of it was left out of the discussion, and there was not a lot of thought on how to provide the supports needed for students with disabilities. That said, we do not have to get there, and we have to make sure we put these supports in place. It requires a lot of advocacy, it's going to require a lot of work, and it's going to have to happen. And I think you can see from New York State they are putting together some guidance. There's going to have to be more flexibility. There's going to have to be, again, more supports. There are going to have to be alternative ways to take the tests. There's going to have to be a lot more thought to what not just college readiness means, but career readiness means. So it's important for all of us to be advocates for our own children and to explain to our school districts what they need to do. Again, the professional development is key. Okay, and then let's see. Another question, how do parents cope with the fact that higher grade levels are being pushed down? That's absolutely another legitimate question, because in fact that is exactly what the Common Core does. It's pushing down the higher grades because it's aligned to what students are supposed to be when they graduate. So again, you're just going to have to advocate strongly with the school district to make sure that the lessons are differentiated. It's not realistic to think that all students can learn on that level without a lot of support. Another question here. This year was awful for many students with special needs across New York State. Co-taught opportunities were being less available. Bill Gates even said it may take a decade to see if the Common Core learning standards work. My child doesn't have a decade. Again, that's exactly right, and I don't have an answer for that, unfortunately. On top of the Common Core learning standards, there is the tax cap in New York State, which is relatively new, and it mandates a tax increase of less than 2% for every school district. It's actually a lot less than that because of the formula students use. So there are at the same time of these more rigorous learning standards cuts in all across New York State in learning opportunities. So it is difficult, and the students with disabilities in this time period right now are really being shortchanged in a lot of ways because, as noted, you have these rigorous learning standards put in. They're expected to meet the standards. You don't have enough funding. You don't have enough professional development. You don't have enough support. So the only way to really help is to just keep advocating for more support, and there is some flexibility given by New York State, but these students are, you're completely right, caught in an extremely tough space right now. Okay. Let's see, I think that there is a question also. Hang on, there's a few more coming in. Next question is, when will a decision be made for determining if classified children will be able to take a lower grade level state assessment based on their actual level of functioning? And I don't have an answer for that because New York State has applied for the waiver, and there has not been a decision that I could find made on that yet. So you can keep an eye on, we will keep an eye on this also, and we will write a blog about it on our website. And you can keep an eye on this, but I don't have an answer right now because there is a lot of controversy involved in this decision on whether to grant the waiver, because even a lot of advocates for children with disabilities have come out against it because they're claiming it really shortchanges students who should be working toward the standards, or kind of creates a two-tier system and sort of discriminates against students with disabilities, creating what they call the bigotry of soft expectations. So, so I think you're going to have to keep an eye on this. I think it is a way New York State was trying to legitimately just recognize that it's going to take time for students who don't have the right resources or curriculum or teaching to meet these standards, particularly students with disabilities. So I don't have an answer yet, but please keep in touch, and we will update on our website. Okay. Okay. The next question: I am still confused as my child enters high school in September in September. 55 on all Regents exams will get him a diploma. Is there another diploma available or not at this time? I believe if your child enters now, he or she will still be able to get a Regents diploma. But I'll have to analyze the specific situation a little later. But then there is another diploma available. There is a local diploma school districts still have, and then there is, of course, the CDOS for students with disabilities who do not get a regular high school diploma, and then there's the SACS, the Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential. Okay, the next question. In the recent IEP meeting for one of my sons, the school began by stating that the cut score would be the first determination on potential for retention. I thought this was changed by New York State. Can you comment? This is going to be an individual decision by school districts. A lot of school districts do not decide to retain students based on New York State assessments, but a few still do. So again, it's going to be up to school district policy. There's reasons for both ends of it. Some parents complain if don't like it if the school doesn't retain and just moves the student through without achieving proficiency, but more of the suburban school districts in New York State do not retain. But this is, again, school board, school district policy, so please check your particular board and district policy on the retention and how they retain students. Okay. The next question. There is still concern that many children with disabilities are 3 to 4 years below grade level. With cutbacks in services, how do we ensure that appropriate supports are provided, especially when the CSE frequently downplays the needs of students? That's absolutely right, and too often in CSEs you do hear how well the child is doing, and I've even heard in the past year, I've even heard at CSE meetings, oh, that's just the Common Core, don't worry about it, it's going to take time, the Common Core is too hard for everybody. But that's not going to be an excuse anymore because the Common Core is here, and there has been more time now, so you really have to look at those standards and how the children are doing. So the way to ensure appropriate supports are advocating at your CSE meeting, going through the guidance in detail to see what supports are available. If you end up disagreeing with CSE decision and your child keeps falling behind more and more, it's not acceptable to be 3 or 4 years below grade level. There is an option for a due process proceeding and to challenge the recommendations of the CSE to either ask for more support, or you can ask for a more specialized school, you can ask for a different learning environment, you can ask for more just a different class. There's a lot of things you can do to make sure that your child does get enough supports, because it's not acceptable you have to advocate as a parent to have a child 3 to 4 grades below grade level. School districts are often sometimes a little bit fatalistic about it, to think, well, this child is making progress in his or her own way, but as a parent you have to make sure that you advocate, and your child has one chance until age 21, and you have to make sure that they get those supports and do a lot of research. So yes, this is a very challenging time, and I wish I had all the answers and could ensure that each child had the support that they needed, but it's going to take a lot of battles and a lot of advocacy to really make sure these supports are in place, especially for students with disabilities and other struggling learners. So I wanted to thank you for attending today. You can always contact me for questions or comments. My email is here, Marion Walsh at littmankrooks.com. And again, thank you for attending, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the summer, and you can be in touch at any time. Take care.